Making the headlines tonight, His Majesty King Norodom Sihamoni and Her Majesty Queen Mother Norodom Muniniet Sihanouk donated $1.5 million to the Cambodian Mine Action Center. A brief protest was staged in Yangon after Myanmar's military junta executed 4 democracy activists, which it accused of helping to carry out terror acts. And one of the ways the Australian embassies in Cambodia decided to commemorate 70 years of relations was by partnering with and supporting the 11th Cambodia International Film Festival to celebrate both Cambodian and Australian cinema. This is the Daily Roundup on EAC News Channel. A very good evening to you. I am Dekanin. The King of Cambodia, His Majesty King Norodom Sihamoni and Her Majesty Queen Mother Norodom Muniniet Sihanouk donated $1.5 million to Mine Action, which was handed over to the royal government at the Cambodian Mine Action Center on Tuesday morning. The representative of the Ministry of the Royal Palace and personal advisor to the King, Paul, handed over the royal letter and royal property of the King and Queen Mother to the representative of the royal government received by the Acting Secretary of State of the Office of the Council of Ministers, Seng Tieng, the First Deputy Chairman of the Cambodian Mine Action and Victim Assistance Authority, Lee Thuc, and the Director General of CMAC, Heng Ratana. Mr. Paul also handed over the message of the King and Queen Mother as well as the royal property to Prime Minister Hun Sen during the handover ceremony. In the royal message, the King and Queen Mother stated that they wish Samdech Aket Mahasenapadei and His Excellencies, members of the royal government of Cambodia, new successes for the benefit of the nation and the people of Cambodia, as well as the best of luck. Prime Minister Hun Sen also presented a letter of thanks to the King and Queen Mother for providing much-needed funds to help clear mines throughout Cambodia. The Prime Minister said, in response to His Majesty's merits and the deepest humanitarian will, I and all members of the royal government bow down to His Excellency, Your Majesty the King, possessing the 4 blessings of the Buddha: age, class, happiness, and strength. Currently, Cambodia has almost 2,000 square kilometers of land that still needs to be cleared of mines, equivalent to more than 14,000 minefields. A report from the Mine Authority states that in 1992 to May 2022, nationwide demining efforts achieved more than 2.4 billion square meters of land being cleared, equivalent to more than 1 million anti-personnel mines, more than 260,000 mines, and more than 3 million explosive remnants of war. So far, there have been 65,003 victims of landmines and explosive remnants of war in Cambodia, including 4,793 women, 6,106 boys, 1,393 girls. Of the victims, 19,818 died, 9,077 survived with disabilities, and 36,108 survived with injuries. National Assembly President Heng Samrin has said the presence of women in politics and social affairs not only promotes women's rights and gender equality, but also makes a significant contribution to national and global development. EAC News reporter Dashana Gochin has the story.
Speaking at a meeting with a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Vietnam and President of the Vietnamese Women's Federation, Ms. Ha Thi Nha, at the National Assembly building on Tuesday, National Assembly President Heng Samrin said that the presence of women in the field of social and political affairs is a core force and indispensable backbone in contributing to the maintenance of peace and social order, especially in promoting socio-economic growth. The National Assembly President also congratulated Ms. Ha Thi Nha on her re-election as President of the Vietnamese Women's Federation for the 13th mandate 2022 to 2027. Ms. Ha Thi Nha briefed the National Assembly President on the past achievements of the Vietnam Women's Federation, including the good cooperation between the Cambodian Women's Association for Peace and Development, a cooperation that just ended last year, but one which the Vietnamese side is ready to sign on to once again for the next 5 years. She further stated that in Vietnam's 499-member National Assembly, there are 151 female members, equivalent to more than 30% of the whole committee. She also requested President Heng Samrin to facilitate the cooperation between Cambodian women MPs and the Vietnamese Women's Federation in exchanging experiences in the future. On behalf of the National Assembly of Cambodia, President Heng Samrin said he is pleased to welcome Ms. Ha Thi Nha and the visiting delegation to Cambodia, as this visit will definitely contribute to the strengthening of the traditional friendship, solidarity, and cooperation between the two countries. This includes a strengthening of operations in all fields between the party, state, and people of the two countries. Darshana Gauchan, EAC News.
Prime Minister Hun Sen has congratulated the 10 years of progress made by Japanese company Minabe Mitsumi, which has contributed to many achievements in Cambodia. The Prime Minister is also set to preside over the 10th anniversary of the company in Cambodia. During a meeting with Prime Minister Hun Sen at the Peace Palace in Phnom Penh on Tuesday morning, the CEO of Minabe Mitsumi Inc., Yoshihisa Kainuma, briefed the Prime Minister on the progress made by the company in Cambodia, outlining how Minabe Mitsumi has invested more than $10 million in the country over the past 10 years with a strong focus on economic value, speed, and environment. The company has installed nearly 20,000 LED bulbs, contributing to protecting the environment and reducing electricity costs by more than $1 million a year. To commemorate the 10th anniversary of the establishment of Minabe Mitsumi in Cambodia, Mr. Yoshihisa invited Prime Minister Hun Sen to preside over the company's 10th anniversary celebration. The Prime Minister in turn accepted the invitation and expressed his happiness that Minabe Mitsumi was successful and had been expanding its activities. On this occasion, the Prime Minister also recalled the company's history in Cambodia and the decision he had made 10 years ago to catch fish whichever comes first and build trust if they invest in Cambodia. Minabe Mitsumi Inc. is a Japanese multinational corporation and manufacturer of machine parts and electronics. In 2010, the company established a subsidiary in Cambodia to produce electronics and opened production in 2011. The company employs over 9,000 people. The ASEAN chairman, Prime Minister Hun Sen, has denounced and expressed disappointment with the Myanmar military government following the news of the execution of 4 opposition activists. EAC News reporter Dachan Gojin has more.
In a statement issued by the ASEAN chairman on 25 July 2022, he described the implementation of the death sentences just a week before the 55th ASEAN ministerial meeting as highly reprehensible, as it slows down progress made on the implementation of the ASEAN 5-point consensus and further underscores a gross lack of willingness to support peace efforts being made by the ASEAN chair, namely in building trust and confidence to engender a dialogue among all parties concerned in order to end violence and alleviate the suffering of the innocent people. The ASEAN chairman wrote saying that Cambodia wishes to echo the overwhelming voices within ASEAN and the international community in urging the Naypyidaw authorities to take concrete steps toward fully and effectively implementing the 5-point consensus. He said, "We strongly and urgently call on all parties concerned to desist from taking actions that would only further aggravate the crisis, hinder peaceful dialogue among all parties concerned, and endanger peace, security, and stability, not only in Myanmar but the whole region." The statement emphasizes that ASEAN remains resolved to assist Myanmar's return to normalcy and democratic transition, and to find a peaceful political solution to the current crisis through an inclusive dialogue that is Myanmar-led and Myanmar-owned, in line with the 5-point consensus and the ASEAN Charter. This is urgently needed to prevent further loss of lives and to end the suffering of the people of Myanmar, said the ASEAN chairman. On Monday, state media in Myanmar reported that Myanmar's military authorities had executed 4 opposition activists, including Kyaw Min Yu, better known as Jimmy, and former lawmaker and hip-hop artist Pyo Zia Thaw, an ally of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. The 2 others executed were Hla Myoy Aung and Aung Turazaw. The 4 activists had been accused of helping a civilian resistance movement that has fought the military since last year's coup and bloody crackdown on nationwide protests. The implementation of these death sentences marks the Southeast Asian nation's first executions in decades. Darshana Goshen, EAC News.
If it's happening and you need to know about it, you'll get it all right here. EAC News brings you updates and breaking news in English across all of our platforms and channels. The EAC News app, YouTube, Facebook, Telegram, Twitter, and our website www.eacnews.asia. Join me and the rest of the EAC News team every day on your favorite channels. EAC News, Cambodia made clear.
You're watching EAC News. Thank you for joining us. A brief protest was staged in Yangon on Monday, 25th of July, after Myanmar's military junta executed 4 democracy activists, which is accused of helping to carry out terror acts. Video shows a dozen masked protesters risking arrest by holding the public demonstration, at which they displayed a banner reading, "We will never be frightened," and called out the names of the executed activists. There was some applause, apparently from local residents, as they chanted against army and coup leader General Min Aung Hlaing. After a short while, the video shows the protesters dispersing and running off. The executed men were accused of helping a civilian resistance movement that have fought the military since last year's coup and bloody crackdown on nationwide protest. Among those executed were democracy campaigner Kyaw Min Yu, better known as Jimmy, and former lawmaker and hip-hop artist Phyo Sayathaw, an ally of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. The 2 others executed were Lam Yo Ung and Ung Turazo. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Myanmar expressed outrage on Monday, July 25th, after the country's ruling military executed 4 democracy activists, adding that he is fearful of what might come next. Myanmar junta has executed the activists accused of helping to carry out terror acts, it said on Monday, sparking widespread condemnation of the Southeast Asian nation's first executions in decades. Sentenced to death in closed-door trials in January and April, the men had been accused of helping a resistance movement to fight the army that seized power in a coup last year and unleashed a bloody crackdown on its opponents. Tom Andrews, UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar, said the executions prove there is no limit to the depravity of the junta. The junta is despised by most people. They have no support among the population of Myanmar, he said. So I think the message for the people inside the country is that no one is safe. There's no limit to what we will do to those who continue to oppose us. Kyaw Min Yu, 53, and Phyo Sayathaw, a 41-year-old ally of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi, lost their appeals against the sentences in June. The 2 others executed were Lam Yo Ung and Ung Turazo. Andrews said the UN has yet to confirm how the executions were conducted, although he said they may have taken place in Insan prison, which he said had absolutely horrific conditions. At least 140 people remain on death row in the country, Andrews said, and there is every indication the junta could continue conducting executions. "I'm afraid that even more floodgates are now opening," he said. "I'm outraged by what is happening. This is just horrific, but I'm even more fearful of what's to come."
This is just horrific, but I'm
And finally, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Cambodia and Australia. One of the ways the Australian Embassy in Cambodia decided to commemorate this milestone was by partnering with and supporting the 11th Cambodia International Film Festival to celebrate both Cambodian and Australian cinema.
This year's CIFF featured a special Australian panorama, showcasing 20 films from Australia that span across the past 7 decades since diplomatic relations were established between Cambodia and Australia in 1952. According to the festival program, the 20 films in the panorama were chosen for how they reflect the huge growth and prominence of Australian cinema, especially from the 1970s onwards, and as a fascinating point of contrast with the huge growth in Cambodian cinema and creative arts in the 1960s. The Australian panorama kicked off on 29th June with the 2012 musical comedy drama The Sapphires, directed by Wayne Blair. The film tells the story of a talented Australian Aboriginal girl group that traveled to Vietnam to entertain U.S. troops in 1968. The film is based on a 2004 stage play of the same name, which was loosely based on a real-life girl group from the 1960s. The first secretary of the Australian Embassy in Cambodia, Ben Cumming, spoke with EAC News after the opening screening at major Cineplex Eon 1 and explained why The Sapphires had been chosen to open the festival's special focus on Australian cinema.
To begin with, The Sapphires is just such a feel-good film. It's obviously got some really complex undercurrents that are important to us in terms of our Indigenous diplomacy agenda, but it's also just a really good, feel-good film that sort of showcases Australia really well. So we thought it was a perfect choice for the opening of the panorama of Australian cinema.
On why the Australian Embassy decided to use the festival to commemorate the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations, First Secretary Cummings said it was all about celebrating cultural links between people.
Well, part of it is that we have a very strong people-to-people relationship that sort of underpins the Cambodia-Australia relationship. There's about 66,000 Australians that have Cambodian heritage, so it's about the size of Kampong Thom. We thought the film festival is a great way to sort of showcase Australian culture and to help sort of celebrate that cultural and people link that does continue to sort of bind our relationship. It has for the last 70. We would like it to for the next 70, and we think bringing people together, learning a little bit more about each other's cultures is a great way to do that.
The panorama was curated by Variety film critic, producer, and festival curator Richard Kuipers, who has been involved with CIFF since it first began and has been to every single iteration of the festival since. When choosing the 20 films, he said what he looked at most was presenting a broad cross-section of Australian cinema and Australian life, but one which could still be accessible enough for most audiences to understand.
I chose some wonderful comedies, such as Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and Malcolm, which was one of the most successful films in the program. The audience here absolutely went crazy for Malcolm. A little film from 1986. It's not the most famous Australian film ever made. In fact, a lot of people may never even have heard of Malcolm, but it's one that I just knew this film is so special. It will play here in Cambodia in 2022 and the audience will love it. And I also wanted to show some of the more dark aspects of Australian society. Films such as Wake in Fright, a film like Jeddah about Aboriginal issues 70 years ago that paint a very critical picture. And I think this is important because you need to show the aspects of the society in all its diversity to present a true picture. So that's what I was trying to do.
Other prominent titles featured in the panorama included George Miller's 1981 classic Mad Max 2, Baz Luhrmann's Strictly Ballroom, Henry Safran's Storm Boy, and Jennifer Kent's The Babadook. The 2019 film Buoyancy, which featured a Cambodian lead and was partly shot in Cambodia, was also screened. During the 6-day festival, Kuipers had one of the busiest schedules, going back and forth from different venues across Phnom Penh to introduce as many films from the panorama as possible for the audiences in attendance.
It was really important for me to introduce the films, and I introduced every single film that I possibly could, except when there was a clash, and also to watch the film with the audience. I couldn't do it every single time, but I watched a lot of films with the audience and spoke to audience members afterwards to get their reactions and get their response. And I'm really pleased with the responses that I got to the films.
The last day of the 11th CIFF on 3rd July also marked the closing screening of the Australian Special Focus program. The closing film, Lion, was personally chosen by the Australian ambassador to Cambodia, Pablo Kang. While introducing the film, Kuipers reflected briefly on the success of the Australian panorama as a whole and stated with certainty that it was the largest Australian retrospective program presented in any Southeast Asian film festival in history. The Australian ambassador to Cambodia, Pablo Kang, spoke with EAC News after the program ended about how the collaboration between the Australian Embassy and CIFF had first started.
Sure, it was actually in 2020 when the 10th edition of the Cambodian International Film Festival was launched. that we started our collaboration with Cambodia. We had a couple of Australian films showing in that festival at the time. But if you recall, it was March 2020, and pretty much almost as soon as the festival started, COVID descended upon Cambodia. The government had to close cinemas, and so that was the end of that. But we had always hoped that once COVID had been brought under control, that we could do an even bigger collaboration with the Cambodian International Film Festival, and this year was the perfect timing for that, with the vaccines and the support that we've provided, other countries have provided, meaning that cinemas can open again, and that we were able to bring at least 20 Australian movies as part of a panorama of Australian cinema to Cambodia for the festival, and also to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Australia and Cambodia.
Ambassador Kang further elaborated that the embassy's support of CIFF was also based on the belief that the foundation of any strong relationship between two countries is in the people-to-people connections, which is especially evident through arts and culture, of which film is a very big part.
Cambodia is an incredibly young society. Roughly 2/3 of the population is under 30. They love going to the movies. There's been such a great interest in all the movies shown at the festival, including the Australian movies here this week.
In addition to the Panorama program, the film festival also featured a number of other Australian touchpoints. There was the special exhibition on Australian-Cambodian film director Alison Chorn, who flew in from Adelaide to present her work in Cambodia for the first time. A special film discussion presented by veteran documentary filmmaker James Gerrand, who has been filming in Cambodia since the early 1970s, and a masterclass presentation by Richard Kuipers on the 120-year history of Australian cinema. The Cambodia International Film Festival returned for its 11th edition in 2022, after a 2-year pandemic-induced hiatus. The festival was held from 28th June to 3rd July at various venues across Phnom Penh, featuring 144 films from 26 countries and 36 additional events, including masterclasses, cinema talks, and discussions.
Thank you for watching the Daily Roundup here on EAC News Channel. For more breaking news and updates, check our website eacnews.asia or search EAC News on Telegram, Smart TV, or at your favorite app store. More from EAC News team tomorrow night at 8 p.m. See you then!